Okay, so get ready, because on this deep dive, we're going deep into the life of an actual mercenary.
Wow, now that's pretty intense.
Yeah, you're not wrong about that.
yeah.
But trust me on this one, because this is going to be way more than just combat.
Okay.
We're going to really unpack, the motivations and the things they wrestle with ethically, and the journey of this one man who has been through it all and seen it all.
It's wild, yeah?
Yeah, so we have access to these excerpts from this interview with Juan.
Yeah.
And they offer a really fascinating look at the life of a former Spanish legionnaire and private security contractor. So not some movie montage.
Right.
This is the real deal. Boots on the ground, someone who's been there in Bosnia, Somalia, Iraq, Ukraine.
Wow.
And the story gets even more interesting when you learn about how this all got started. I mean, we're talking about a guy whose early fascination with war movies, probably, fueled by some slightly embellished stories from his dad about dodging the draft, actually led him to a life of combat.
Oh, wow.
Like, you've got to wonder, at what point does a childhood fascination become a life path?
Right. Yeah, you start to think about, well, we've all been there, right?
Exactly.
Or you're super stoked about something, whether it's a new job or you're going to see a movie that looks awesome.
Sure.
And then you do it and it's like, oh.
Yeah, it's a total letdown.
It doesn't live up to the hype.
Exactly. And for Juan, that's what happened with the Spanish military.
Okay.
Even peacekeeping in Bosnia, it just didn't satisfy his craving for action.
Wow. So he's like, I need more.
Yeah, he needed more.
Wow.
And that's where things take a turn. So picture this. Juan's impulsivity gets the best of him.
Uh-oh.
He ends up punching a superior officer.
Oh, no.
And boom, he finds himself facing some pretty serious consequences.
Oh, geez.
But instead of being kicked out, he gets shipped off to the Spanish Legion.
Oh, wow. Talk about a be careful what you wish for moment.
Right.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is that what we learned about the Legion is that it's every bit as tough as those stories make it seem.
I believe it.
Grueling training, those almost comically fast marches at 180 steps per minute.
Wait, 180 steps per minute?
180 steps per minute.
I'm getting winded just thinking about that.
I know. It's just like,
oh, goodness.
It makes you appreciate just the sheer willpower.
Right.
To not only survive that kind of training, but to thrive in that environment.
Yeah, it's got to be more than just physical at that point. It's got to be like mental, some kind of shared thing where...
It's the shared experience.
Yeah.
It's the reliance on each other.
Yeah.
It's understanding that you're part of something so much bigger than yourself.
Absolutely.
But it's not all serious. Juan even talks about a tradition of fist fighting with fellow legionnaires as like a show of respect.
The fist fight?
A fist fight.
As a sign of respect?
Yeah.
That's wild.
You'd almost think they were trying to prepare him for the world of private military contracting.
Oh, yeah.
Which is exactly where he ends up next.
Wow.
And his first taste of that life. Protecting tuna boats from Somali pirates.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is where we really start to see the reality of modern mercenary work.
Okay.
Forget the Hollywood action sequences. This is about weeks at sea, battling boredom 1 minute, and facing down these life or death decisions the next.
Wow.
And it's not always clear cut.
Right.
Juan talks about the tension of just even firing warning shots at the pirates and the conflict with the boat captain who's more worried about his catch than the danger they're in.
Oh, my goodness.
And it's an unsettling realization that sometimes winning is just about making it out alive. I mean, can you imagine weeks at sea like that?
It's no joke, right?
Constant tension.
Yeah.
Those split-second decisions.
And the isolation?
Yeah.
You're just out there with this small group of people.
Makes you wonder what kind of person thrives in that kind of environment.
It's a trip, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, some guys you talk to, it's like they want that paycheck. They want the autonomy of being able to choose their missions and all that.
Right.
But then you got guys like Juan who are a little more complicated.
Yeah.
It's like they need to be in the action to really feel alive.
And that kind of reminds me of when he decided to join the fight against ISIS.
Oh, yeah, in Iraq.
Yeah, in Iraq.
That was a whole other beast.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about a whole different level of intensity.
He talked about being driven by idealism.
Okay.
But also admits to feeling a certain adrenaline addiction.
Oh, yeah.
And,
I think that plays into it.
I think it has to.
100%.
It's like being drawn to danger.
Totally. It's a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
This urge to test your limits.
Yeah.
To confront fear. Yeah.
It's not always rational, but it's definitely a part of what makes us human.
It's primal, man.
Yeah.
And, Juan's experience in Iraq I think it says a lot about modern warfare,
Okay.
about the gap between what we expect and what it's actually like.
You mean like when he gets to Iraq and he's expecting to be on the front lines right away,
Yeah.
and then he just ends up stuck on guard duty?
Dude, that's brutal.
Can you imagine?
The letdown.
Yeah, the letdown.
It's like you said,
Yeah.
you build up this image in your head
Totally.
of constant action,
Yeah.
heroism,
Yeah.
and then bam.
It's just bureaucracy and waiting around
It's the waiting that gets you.
and the boredom.
It messes with your head.
It can be just as jarring as the actual fighting.
Oh, 100%.
And on top of all of that, you've got the psychological toll, right? Nobody really talks about that.
And Juan doesn't sugarcoat it.
Oh,
He talks about this one time where he was ordered to execute a prisoner.
oh wow.
This young man accused of working with the enemy.
Jeez.
Can you imagine being put in that position?
I don't even want to think about that.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, no kidding.
The weight of taking a life like
They
that.
got to do something to you.
And it highlights this other side of war that people don't really talk about.
Okay.
It's not just about the physical casualties.
Right.
It's the invisible wounds.
Scars you can't see.
The things that stay with you long after the fighting's over.
Trauma, man. Pure trauma.
He actually says that his time in Iraq really changed him,
Yeah,
made him more aware of his own mortality,
I can see that.
like staring death in the face.
Yeah.
You know, it shifts your priorities. Big time, big time.
And yet, despite all that,
Wait,
all the disillusionment, the trauma, the loss he saw,
Yeah.
Juan's pulled back into conflict, but this time in Ukraine,
It's Ukraine, huh?
what do you make of that?
I don't know, man.
It's wild.
Red Vector, everything.
Yeah.
You'd think he'd be done with it all.
Yeah, but it's like he has this internal compass. It's like warrior code, he calls it,
Yeah.
that just draws him to where the fighting is.
Where he's needed.
Yeah, and this need to protect people.
Protect the innocent, huh?
Those who can't protect themselves.
Yeah, I get it.
He sees a need and he feels obligated to help, even if it puts him in harm's way.
It's a powerful thing,
Yeah,
that sense of duty,
it really is.
especially when it takes you to a place like Ukraine.
And he faces some really intense stuff there.
Yeah.
When he witnessed the aftermath of the Bucha massacre,
Oh, man.
talk about heavy stuff.
The things he must have seen.
It makes you wonder how anyone comes back from something like that unchanged.
You don't?
It's just a stark reminder of the human cost of this all.
The ripple effects?
Yeah.
Go on and on.
It's not just contained to the battlefield.
Never is.
And yet, even in all that darkness,
Okay.
Juan still finds glimmers of hope.
Really?
Yeah, he talks about the camaraderie between the soldiers,
Yeah.
the bonds forged in those moments of intense pressure.
You go through something like that together.
Yeah.
It changes you.
He even found love in the middle of it all.
Wow, that's amazing.
I know, right?
Talk about finding light in the darkness.
It really is incredible.
That's-
It just shows the resilience of the human spirit.
For sure.
It really does.
But even with all that, you know, he couldn't escape the loss.
No, he experiences some really profound loss in Ukraine.
He loses some people.
5 comrades in
Right.
a single engagement.
Damn.
He had to make the agonizing decision to leave some of their bodies behind.
Oh, man, I can't imagine.
The things he's seen and the things he's had to do.
The weight of that.
You're right.
It's got to be heavy.
The scars run deep.
Deeper than we can know.
And yet his story takes this unexpected turn.
Okay.
He goes back to Ukraine, but not as a fighter.
Really?
Yeah, he starts training a new generation of security contractors.
Interesting.
It's like he's trying to find a way to make sense of it all,
To find some meaning.
to reconcile his past with his present.
To do some good.
Yeah, to maybe use his experiences for something more than just survival.
I like that.
Me too.
Turning his pain into purpose.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to break the cycle.
It's a powerful thing.
It really makes you think about the bigger picture here, you know? Like,
Yeah.
what role do these private military contractors play in all of this?
Yeah, it's a whole other world, right?
It's kind of a shadowy world.
Definitely.
They operate outside the traditional rules of engagement.
No doubt. And that's where things get really complicated.
Totally. So on the one hand, you have these guys like Juan who seem to be driven by this personal code,
Yeah.
wanting to do some good in the world.
Right. They're looking for a purpose out there and all that chaos.
But then on the other hand, you have this potential for exploitation.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Where profit takes priority over everything else.
Sadly, that happens way too often.
It's a slippery slope for sure. And, you know, as warfare keeps changing with all these drones and AI getting more advanced, it feels like the lines are going to get even more blurred.
Oh, absolutely. And that raises a whole other set of questions, right?
Totally.
Like accountability,
Mm-hmm.
oversight.
Yeah.
How do you even define warfare in the 21st century?
Exactly.
It's not as simple as it used to be.
Definitely not. And honestly, it's a bit unsettling when you really think about it.
No kidding.
But that's why I think Juan's story is so important.
I agree.
It's not just about battles and stuff. It's making us face these uncomfortable truths about what's really going on in the world.
Yeah, he's giving us a peek behind the curtain.
Right.
And it's not always easy to look at.
Not always pretty.
But it's real, man.
It's the reality we're living in.
Exactly. We can't just ignore it.
So from those early days in the Spanish Legion to all the chaos of Iraq and what he saw in Ukraine, Juan's journey, it really reveals a lot about what it means to be human.
For sure. I mean, you've got bravery in there, recklessness,
It's definitely.
a desire for something bigger than himself,
Yeah, that search for purpose.
wrestling with doubt.
Exactly, and I think that's the thing.
That's the thing.
His story doesn't give us any easy answers.
It's not a how-to manual.
Not at all.
More like a mirror, right?
Yeah.
Makes you look at yourself and the world a little differently.
It's a call to engage with these tough questions, you know?
Yeah.
To really think about the ethical dilemmas and recognize that conflict has a very real human cost.
Every time.
It's about understanding that the world is rarely black and white.
100%.
There's so much gray area out there.
Most of life is lived in the gray areas.
And sometimes the hardest choices are the ones we make in those gray areas.
When the lines are blurred,
Exactly.
tough calls. Man, tough calls.
So where does that leave us?
With more questions than answers, probably.
Probably. But for me, at least, it's about recognizing the courage it takes to face those complexities head on.
Yeah.
And to try to find a better way forward, even if it's not always clear what that looks like.
Well said.
Juan's story is just one story.
One man's experience.
It makes you realize how much we all have in common.
We're all searching for something.
Absolutely. And with that, we're going to wrap up this deep dive.
Thanks for having me, man. Always good to chat.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for listening, everybody. Until next time.